In, let's say, 10 minutes, I will give you a short overview of the main concept of the natural risk zones team. And at the end of this presentation, I will address also our collaboration with the flood directing reporting drafting team that we have established. So the natural risk zone, here is the definition that is in the directive. I will not read it, but it's a very wide definition which addresses really a lot of types of natural hazards. It also mixes somehow the risk concept in it and the vulnerability. So the biggest problem of our team is really the clarification of the terminology that is used in this domain, because really we have found that some data providers are providing vulnerability or hazard maps, but actually they are risk maps and vice versa. So that was the biggest problem of the team, to clarify the terminology. So the approach that was taken in this team is that the natural risk zones are the zones where the natural hazards intersect with highly populated areas or areas of or elements of a particular value, and the risk in this is actually a function of the hazard, vulnerability, and exposure. In the coming slides, I will try to explain this let's say, in a graphical way. So here is the, let's say, here's the picture that should describe the main objects that are defined in the zone. So we have the area, we have the feature which is called natural hazard, which is defined by scientists. Then we have exposed elements. Exposed elements mean that they are exposed to the type of hazard, but each exposed element is either vulnerable or not vulnerable to that type of hazard. And in the case that an exposed element, so you can think of property, of people, or social or services, infrastructure, if these elements are vulnerable to the type of hazard, then we speak about a risk zone. Okay? Another picture to demonstrate this concept is, for example, taken from the type of hazard flooding. So you can see here we have taken an example of the flood with the return period of 100 years. So you can see in the, let's say, in the terminology of the Inspire Natural Risk Zone, it's a modeled hazard. It's a hazard that actually here you can see the elements that are at risk inside, different types. So for instance, the property, roads, agriculture, industry, and so on. But you can see that some are inside the area, some are affected by that hazard, some are not. And also, those that are inside the hazard, they are also either vulnerable or not, meaning they are maybe protected, they are by nature not really affected by the flooding, and so on. So this picture should demonstrate the major concepts that this team is dealing with. So this is the final version, or let's say the final draft of the data model of the natural risk zones, which consists of those three major elements, as I said, so the hazard area, risk zone, and the exposed elements. During our last meeting, which actually took place last week, we have clarified the distinction between the observed events. So these are the events that took place in past, so like the register of landslides, the register of floods, of past floods, and others. So we clearly separated those from the hazard areas, which we consider as something like a model areas where the hazard can take place. So during our meetings, we really consider three main categories of the data providers. So we are really concerned about the providers of natural hazards, including those that provide the registers or the data about the past events. We are also concerned about the vulnerability maps providers, and of course that we are also concerned by the provision of the risk zones or risk maps data. By the way, what do you think this map, as I shown you here, is this a risk map, or is it a vulnerability map, or is it a hazard map? I will give you a clue because it's coming from Spain, and they call this a risk map, but actually it's a vulnerability map, and to be more precise, it's a hazard map with the different types of the return period. So that's a demonstration how the terminology really plays a big role in this theme, and I think this is, I'm repeating myself, this is really the key issue and the key challenge that we are dealing in that theme. Also, we have two types of data, let's say. We have vectors and we have also grids. So in the last model, we are trying to merge those two words together. And this is an example of the current proposal where we are able to merge the coverages and also the vectors in the core model. The advantage here is that this is really addressing the reality that some input data are really in the form either of vectors or the cover or grids, but also the output data, the vulnerability maps, the risk maps, also the maps of hazards in many cases are in a form of grids. So therefore, you know, we are really trying to merge those two concepts in one model. Another issue in our team was the code list, the classification of the hazards and classification of the exposed elements. Well, here we've had several discussions about, you know, how we address this, because there is no one unified natural hazard classification that is accepted by all community. So what we have come up with is the very generic approach with the two-level classification, very generic, which is extensible by the member states or by the data providers in a, what we say, in a narrow concept, meaning that they have to follow the first category, the top level classification, but the second level, more detail, can be extended inside those top categories. So this is to us the kind of a level, or we are facilitating here the semantic interoperability in this field. Of course, that we also enable data providers to provide their specific classifications or specific terminology. So as you can see here, these are the possibilities how they can express their local or regional classification schemes. But here, as mandatory, we provide those generic classification schemes for types of hazard and types of exposed elements. Just a quick demonstration of those top-level hierarchies, which, as you can see, are really very generic, and everybody can fit, everybody can map to those generic concepts. We have developed several use cases. Now I'm coming a little bit to the collaboration with the flood people. So these are the categories of use cases that we developed. So we have 2 use cases for floods. We have 3 use cases for landslides, forest fire. Recently, we have added the risk management scenario coming from France. So we were really trying to monitor what the risk managers are doing, you know, how they really address the final risk assessment and the provision of the risk maps. So we took an example and we tried to describe the example from France, and we test the core model whether it really provides the necessary information. And we have the earthquake insurance use case. So, speaking about the reporting obligations, we have the flood directive that is in place. We have established a very close collaboration with the flood directive reporting drafting group. We had a meeting. We are I would say we are really close, because also a member of the team is in the Inspire Natural Risk Zones is also a member of that drafting team for flood directive. Before we publish version 2 of data specification, we had a meeting with them. We explained, you know, what is the purpose of this dedicated extension for floods, and we have received several comments from the team, and vice versa. They are sending us their GIS guidelines. They are sending us the reporting sheets, and we are really discussing, how we go further in the harmonization of those two directives. So it was also agreed that the full harmonization will be provided in the second reporting cycle, which, if I'm not mistaken, is after 2015. So that was also clear that at this moment we have, well, let's say the high level harmonization. But, of course, that we have to go in details, and as you know, the devil is in details. So we plan to do that, for the second reporting cycle after 2015. Just to demonstrate, maybe it's too difficult to read, but this is just the demonstration of the extension for flood risk, taking the core model and extend this model or specialize this model with the requirements that are identified in the flood directive, which are mainly the preliminary flood risk assessment, which is the Article 4, then the areas of potential significant flood risk, which is Article 5, and then provision of hazard maps and risk maps in the terminology of flood people. In the terminology of Inspire people, we would call this a collections, collections of the areas potential to flooding. Also, we have inherited one feature from Annex 1 hydrography field, which is called inundated land. So inundated land in our terminology is actually it's a type of observed event, which is also clearly shown here. So this is an draft of the extensions, which will not be in the legal part of the Inspire. It will be an extension as a kind of a demonstration how the core model of natural risk zone team can be extended to accommodate the requirements from the flood directive. What are the major challenges? I already mentioned the terminology issue, also the classification. Then, of course, we have a lot of kind of assessments inside the model, assessment of likelihood of occurrence, assessment of the level of risk, assessment of level of vulnerability. All those assessments, of course, are quantitative, qualitative, but of course they are not harmonized, or at least the procedure how those assessments are being done. This is not, of course, harmonized across countries. So that is really a long-term process to harmonize these things. So that's a big challenge. And finally, the challenge is how we continue collaborating with the drafting team for flood reporting. Thank you very much. If you have any question, I'm here.